You want them to regret losing you, not in a vengeful way, but in that "I didn't realize what I had until it was gone" kind of way. And here's what most people get wrong. They think proving their value means more texting, more chasing, more emotional monologues that beg someone to come back. But here's the twist. They only start to miss you when they feel your absence, when your life becomes a space they no longer have access to. If you're anxiously attached, this feels like the opposite of what you want to do, but it's the exact thing that shifts the power dynamic. Because the second you stop giving them emotional access and start showing up for yourself, something interesting happens. They start wondering where you went. And regret only ever happens in silence, not in noise. So, if you're ready to make your avoidant ex truly feel the weight of what they let go, this is how you do it. When you're anxiously attached, your natural instinct is to focus all your energy on the person who pulled away. You obsess over every message, every silence, every slight shift in their tone or attention. You start replaying conversations, analyzing the last few days or weeks, trying to pinpoint the moment things started to change. The problem is, the more you do this, the more power you hand over to them. You place them at the center of your emotional world, hoping that if you understand them enough or give enough, they'll come back and finally give you what you've been craving. But that mindset not only keeps you stuck, it also reinforces the very dynamic that pushed them away in the first place. Avoidants pull away from pressure, and when you lean in too hard, especially after a breakup, it confirms to them that you're still orbiting around their emotional gravity. That doesn't make them miss you, it makes them feel suffocated, even from a distance. What most people don't realize is that regret isn't born from someone seeing how much you want them. It's born from someone seeing that you don't need them anymore, that you're no longer waiting at the door. So when I say shift the focus from them to you, I don't just mean start going to the gym or take a vacation. I mean start recentering your life around your own values, your own needs, your own boundaries. It means asking yourself, where did I abandon myself to try to hold on to someone else? And more importantly, what have I been ignoring in my life while I've been fixated on this one person's approval? You have to start seeing yourself as the person who holds the keys, not them. When your thoughts revolve around their every move, you give away your time, your peace, and your emotional currency. And they feel that, even if you're not contacting them, even if you're giving them space. If internally you're still caught up in their world, you're still energetically handing them the script. Reclaiming that script means taking yourself off the emotional roller coaster they've put you on. It means waking up and deciding to live like you matter, even if they don't show up to witness it. It means doing things you stopped doing because you were too anxious to enjoy anything outside of that relationship. Calling friends again, putting your energy into your career, rebuilding the habits that made you feel alive. Not because it'll make them jealous or regretful, but because this is the version of you that's been buried under fear and longing. When you shift the spotlight back onto yourself, something powerful happens. Your world expands beyond them. They're no longer the sun you orbit around. They become a detail in a much bigger story. And this shift creates a ripple effect, because the moment they sense that they're no longer the center of your world, that their actions no longer determine your emotional state, that they've lost that control, they start to feel the loss. Not of someone who was begging to be chosen, but of someone who remembered how to choose themselves. Avoidant partners are wired to fear emotional engulfment. The closer things get, the more they pull back, not necessarily because they don't care, but because intimacy triggers something in them that feels unsafe. Now, if you're anxiously attached, that exact pulling away hits your deepest fear of abandonment. Your instinct is to respond by doing more, explaining yourself, seeking reassurance, trying to fix the distance by filling it with communication. This creates a dynamic that's hard to break. You react emotionally, they withdraw further, and around it goes. But if your goal is to make someone regret losing you, you can't keep playing into that cycle. What disrupts the pattern is learning to respond instead of react. And that shift, while subtle, changes everything. Reacting is impulsive. It's the text you send in a rush of emotion, the long message explaining how you feel, hoping they'll finally understand, the late night call when you're feeling panicked and need a response to feel okay. In those moments, you're not acting from your power, you're acting from your fear. You're trying to regulate your anxiety by seeking something external, their reply, their reassurance, their presence. But what actually happens is that your reactions validate their fears. It reinforces the story they have that intimacy means pressure, that being with you comes with an emotional cost, and they start to associate you not with connection, but with intensity. That's the exact opposite of what makes someone regret losing you. Responding, on the other hand, comes from a place of composure and self-respect. It means you take the time to feel what you're feeling, but you don't let those emotions drive your actions. You become a witness to your own experience, not a slave to it. So when they go cold or distant, instead of reacting with panic, you respond with calm. Maybe you don't send that message right away. Maybe you take a day to check in with yourself first. Maybe you write out what you want to say and then ask, is this really about me, or is this about trying to control how they see me? That pause gives you the upper hand. It allows you to stay grounded when they expect chaos. And that's what surprises them. Avoidants often anticipate that when they create space, the other person will fill it with noise. When you don't, it unsettles their expectations. It makes them question their assumptions. It also makes them curious. Why aren't you chasing? Why aren't you fighting for their attention? Why aren't you showing up in the same pattern you always have? That quiet confidence, that emotional restraint becomes magnetic. It signals that you've outgrown the old dynamic, that you're no longer playing the emotional caretaker, trying to make everything feel safe and close for someone who keeps stepping back. That difference in behavior doesn't go unnoticed, and over time, it's not the reaction that lingers in someone's mind. It's the calm, composed response they didn't see coming. That's the moment they start to feel the emotional shift, not because you yelled louder, but because you chose not to yell at all. When you're anxiously attached, distance feels like danger. Emotional or physical space in a relationship can trigger deep-rooted fears that you're being forgotten, replaced, or abandoned. So naturally, when someone pulls away, especially someone with an avoidant attachment style, your instinct is to close that gap as quickly as possible. You try to bridge the distance with texts, check-ins, attempts at reconnection. But the more you chase, the more they retreat. Because for an avoidant, space isn't threatening. Space is safety. So what happens is a painful mismatch. The anxious partner sees distance as a problem to solve, while the avoidant sees it as a necessity to survive. This is why making peace with distance becomes such a powerful shift, not just for your own growth, but for changing the dynamic entirely. Making peace with distance means learning how to sit with discomfort. It's about resisting the urge to self-soothe through contact and instead learning how to regulate your emotions without needing their immediate reassurance. It means recognizing that their silence, their pause, their absence, it doesn't mean you've done something wrong. It doesn't mean you're unlovable. It just means they're operating from their own wiring, and that wiring doesn't have to dictate your self-worth. But here's the part that changes everything. When you stop treating distance like a threat, you become unpredictable. And unpredictability, in the healthiest way, sparks intrigue. Avoidants are used to people chasing them when they pull away. They're used to others reacting to their coldness with panic, explanations, and attempts to fix. So when they pull back and you don't follow, when you stay quiet, grounded, and unaffected, it disrupts everything they expect. It makes them wonder if they misread your emotional dependence. It makes them second-guess their assumptions about your neediness. And most importantly, it forces them to sit with the space they created without the usual distraction of your pursuit. That silence gets loud. It's in that space that regret begins to take root. But more than making someone else reflect, this shift is for you. It's your moment to remember that your peace is not dependent on their presence. You start to see that you don't fall apart when they don't text back, that your day still moves forward, that you can experience the ache of missing someone and still keep showing up for your life. The power in making peace with distance isn't just about triggering someone else's awareness. It's about building your own resilience. Every time you sit through that discomfort without trying to fix it through them, you become emotionally stronger. You begin to trust yourself. You realize you're capable of staying grounded even when the relationship feels uncertain. This kind of self-regulation becomes your superpower. It's what separates you from the version of yourself that used to cling. It's what sets you apart in their mind, too. Because when you no longer panic at their distance, you show them they no longer have the emotional control they once had. That shift doesn't just change the way they see you, it changes the way you see yourself. And from that place, you start making different choices. You stop negotiating for closeness and start requiring mutual effort. You no longer treat silence as punishment. You treat it as clarity. One of the most powerful ways to shift the dynamic with an avoidant ex and to trigger genuine regret is to start investing your time, energy, and love in places where it's actually reciprocated. When you're anxiously attached, your attention tends to stay locked on the person who left. Even when they're gone, they still occupy your mental and emotional real estate. You go through your day thinking about them, replaying what went wrong, imagining different outcomes. You might even convince yourself that if you just wait long enough, stay available enough, or prove your value in some way, they'll come back and realize what they lost. But that mindset quietly depletes you. It keeps you emotionally tethered to someone who isn't showing up for you. And more importantly, it keeps you from fully showing up for the people and opportunities that are. What begins to shift everything is when you consciously decide to take all of that anxious energy and redirect it somewhere meaningful. That might look like reconnecting with friendships you've neglected, pouring yourself into work you're passionate about, or spending time around people who see your worth without you needing to convince them. The idea isn't to distract yourself or pretend you don't care. It's about breaking the habit of emotionally over-investing in someone who underdelivered. You start putting your value where it's mirrored back to you, not questioned or minimized. And when you do that, something changes, not just in how others see you, but in how you begin to see yourself. Avoidant partners often operate on the subconscious belief that you'll always be there, that your attention is a guarantee. So even when they distance themselves, they assume they can come back whenever they want, that you'll still be orbiting around their availability. But when they notice your energy is no longer pointed in their direction, that you're not trying to re-engage, that you're actually moving on and pouring yourself into places where you're celebrated instead of tolerated, it unsettles them. Suddenly, they're not in control of the narrative. They're not the one being chased. They're not the emotional center of your world. And that loss of emotional power is often what sparks their regret. More importantly, investing where you're valued starts to rebuild your identity outside of the relationship. When you're anxiously attached, your sense of self can become deeply intertwined with how someone else sees you. So when they leave or go cold, it feels like your worth leaves with them. But when you begin consistently choosing people and places that reflect your value, that worth becomes internal again. You no longer wait to be chosen. You start choosing yourself. You start walking into rooms with confidence because you're not desperate for validation from someone who couldn't meet you halfway. You begin to set a new standard for how you want to be loved. One that doesn't involve chasing crumbs or proving your emotional loyalty to someone who wasn't ready to receive it. This shift isn't loud or performative. It's quiet, steady, and powerful. And people notice it. Your avoidant ex notices it. They might not say it, they might not reach out right away, but they feel the difference. They sense the boundary. They sense the emotional gap that they once filled, now being occupied by people and passions that lift you up. That's when regret starts to whisper in their ear, because the version of you who begged to be seen has been replaced by someone who doesn't wait to be noticed. When you're anxiously attached, you tend to overexpose yourself emotionally. You share too much, too soon. You explain, over-explain, clarify your intentions, justify your needs, and try to keep the connection alive by constantly keeping yourself emotionally available. You think that if the other person just understands you, sees the depth of your love, sees how honest and open you are, they'll finally meet you in that same emotional space. But with an avoidant, That level of transparency doesn't always build connection. It can actually create pressure. Avoidants tend to value space, boundaries, and emotional regulation. So when you reveal every thought, every fear, every hope, it can overwhelm them rather than draw them closer. This doesn't mean your emotions are wrong. It means the way you've been giving them away hasn't been strategic. And if you want someone to regret losing you, one of the most powerful tools you can use is mystery. Mystery doesn't mean playing games or being manipulative. It means being selective with what you share and when. It's about recognizing that not everyone earns the right to know the deepest parts of you, especially not someone who has already proven they can't hold your vulnerability with care. When you start pulling back and containing your emotional world, you become less predictable. That's what sparks curiosity. And curiosity is the emotional gap where regret begins to grow, because suddenly the person who once felt like they had full access to you is now met with silence, with boundaries, with privacy. And in that space, they're left wondering what's going on in your world. When you rebuild mystery, you shift the balance of emotional exposure. Instead of being the one who's constantly expressing and reaching out, you become more composed, more self-contained. That doesn't mean cold or detached. It means grounded and intentional. You stop volunteering your heart to someone who hasn't shown they know how to care for it. You let them experience the absence of your emotional availability. And when they do, they start to realize just how much they used to take it for granted. They remember how it felt to be trusted with your honesty, your affection, your vulnerability, and how they didn't rise to meet it. That contrast is where regret begins to live. This doesn't just change the way they see you, it changes the way you operate. When you protect your emotional space, you build a stronger relationship with yourself. You no longer rely on constant sharing as a way to manage your anxiety. You stop needing someone else's validation to feel seen. You learn how to sit with your emotions, process them, and choose what to reveal and what to keep sacred. You learn that holding some parts of yourself back isn't withholding, it's self-respect, and that self-respect becomes magnetic. It radiates in your energy. It creates an air of quiet confidence that says, I know who I am, and not everyone gets access to that. Avoidants are often drawn to people who feel emotionally safe, but they also need a certain level of distance to feel comfortable. By rebuilding mystery, you give them that distance, but not in the way they're used to. This time, you're not waiting in the wings, ready to explain yourself the moment they reach out. You've become someone they no longer fully understand, someone who isn't handing over every thought and emotion for free. And that unfamiliarity, that quiet confidence, becomes the very thing that starts to make them wonder what they lost.